Cześć ludzie, what's up people? Hola, VIGO'S here. Welcome to another episode. We did a video last week, I don't know if you saw it, where Carolina and I showed our support to the Ukrainian people in Ukraine. Also some words of praise to the Polish community. Many of you guys subscribe to my channel are Polish, so it should not fly under the radar the amount of support and help you guys are providing to the neighboring sister country. This week I wanted to continue on the same topic for obvious reasons. First of all, how relevant it is still, and second of all, because as a non-European, I find myself not as well versed, not as educated on this topic as I would like to. And I know that many of you guys are not European, or you are European but you have a partner that is not European, or simply you as a European person are also not as well educated on this as you would like to, or you forgot. It happens, right? So what are the reasons why Ukraine is going through what is going through? And there are economic reasons, there are geopolitical reasons, and I just don't know what they are, and I want to know. I want to find out. I found a video, and I want to make a reaction to this video from a YouTube channel, great YouTube channel, and the videos there are really well made, high quality. It's called Real Life Lore. I'm gonna put links in the description. And this video was uploaded 2 days after the invasion on the 26th of February, and it's called Why Russia is Invading Ukraine. Let's get our hands dirty, let's see why this is happening, and it's time to go to school on this subject.
Throughout the past few months, there has been almost constant news and coverage in the West about Russia's imminent plans to invade Ukraine.
Started large-scale military drills this morning.
And this is a very dangerous moment.
Stoking fears of an invasion.
More than 2,000 troops, according to American intelligence, sent within the 24 hours.
American citizens should leave now.
On the morning of February the 24th, these fears proved to be well-founded. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, effectively declared war on Ukraine and authorized the Russian military to invade the country. Explosions were quickly...
Yeah, it's like, I remember with all the troops gathering at the border and everything, and most people were like, is he gonna invade? Is he not gonna invade? I don't believe that he's gonna do something like that, right? Like, he will be breaking so many international laws.
And many others inside of Belarus along their border with Ukraine. For comparison, this is nearly the same size as the entire Ukrainian military, and about the same number of troops sent by the United States when invading Iraq in 2003. This is certainly large enough to be an effective invasion force. Even further, the Russian government has recognized the independence of the two breakaway states inside of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's how it started, right? Like when Putin...
And ordered Russian troops inside of both. When factoring in the Russian military presence already stationed in Crimea, you can quickly begin seeing that the Russians have Ukraine almost entirely surrounded. And now...
Yeah, it's like, I remembered when the whole Crimea thing happened, I was just sitting and thinking, is this really happening? I mean, are they going to just allow that? He can just go in and just take a territory? And once again, as a non-European, I read that, oh, at least they were saying that there are so many Russians there, or people with a lot of Russian ancestry, and they want to belong to Russia. And I was like, I mean, it still doesn't feel right, but maybe I did not know what it was, right? Anyway.
Now that war has broken out, it has the potential to unleash the most serious conflict seen in Europe since the Second World War.
Imagine how scary that is. The biggest conflict seen in Europe after the Second World War.
What exactly does Vladimir Putin and Russia want with Ukraine? And
yeah, what do they want?
Is, of course, it's complicated. The origins of what Putin wants today are rooted in what happened more than 3 decades ago, back in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union first collapsed. For centuries before this event, whether as part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire, the modern countries we know of today as Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and others had all been a part of the same country, and their people had largely moved between all of them across generations. These places are all deeply and intimately connected by their shared history, and for decades, that history involved being widely recognized as one of the world's most dominant and formidable global superpowers. But all of that changed in late 1991, when, suddenly, the sweeping United Empire that had existed in some form or another for centuries collapsed, and left in its place 15 newly independent republics. Today,
So imagine that for a guy like President Putin, who believes in the USSR, believes in the Soviet Union, now all of these nations breaking away and being independent, it must have been like a nightmare. And what I hear from him and everything is that he wants the USSR back. That's what he wants.
the largest of them, Russia, has only half of the population that the former United Soviet Union had. And she possesses an economy that's only moderately larger than Spain's. A country
What?
with only a third of the population.
The
that
Russian
ceased being a great
economy
power
is
back in the 18th century.
similar to the
At
Spanish
same
one?
time, the massive amounts of territories that were once dominated from the central government in Moscow have been shrinking almost continuously ever since. During the Cold War, there were two rival competing military alliances on the European continent. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in the west, and the Warsaw Pact in the east. Moscow didn't outright rule the countries of the Warsaw Pact, but they were effectively locked into Moscow's orbit as thralls or puppet states. From Moscow's perspective, these states provided a massive...
From what I know, obviously Poland was never part of the USSR, but it was as it says there, a puppet state. I guess it was ruled by the USSR in some way, right? I mean, in many ways, I believe.
Buffer against any potential military incursion from their primary Cold War rivals to the west in NATO. You see, from the Netherlands in the west to the Ural Mountains in the east, this whole part of Europe is dominated by a geographic feature called the North European Plain. Almost entirely flat, the plain is shaped like a funnel, with a very narrow width in northern Germany, but with a mouth that opens up increasingly wider as it approaches the Ural Mountains.
Okay.
As the open plain gets wider across the east, it becomes increasingly difficult to defend across its entire length. And as a result, from the perspective of any regime based in Moscow, regardless of the time period and regardless of the ideology, it is imperative to expand control westwards across as much of this open plain as possible in order to narrow the gap that they need to defend in the event of a conflict with the West.
I did not know that. So being a mostly open plain, they can be attacked from different areas, and it will be very difficult for them to control the attacks. But if they enclose to the opening, or if they enclose or dominate us closer to where the narrow part of the plain is, which is, as they say there in Germany, then they can just stop it like a dam, right? Like a dam. You put here, you can stop the river. Incredible. This is all tactical, right? Geopolitics.
During the Cold War, the control of this plain by a regime in Moscow was at its greatest historical extent, and was exerted either outright or by proxy from the Urals all the way through East Germany. And the entire wider section of the funnel was firmly controlled by Moscow, with Austria and Finland remaining neutral and Yugoslavia a non-aligned communist state. The only fronts that Moscow at the time had to truly worry about against NATO were across the Sudeten Mountains, the Black Sea, and a narrow line across the North European plain in central Germany. All easily defensible positions. Any invasion of the Soviet world from the west across these geographic frontiers would have been incredibly difficult. But in the 30 years since 1991, the situation has changed dramatically against Moscow's favor. Today, the former Warsaw Pact territories of East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria are all a part of NATO, while the former Soviet republics themselves of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all are as well.
So for a person like Putin,
reality has pushed the NATO front line
it's super scary to have all those territories that belong to NATO knocking at his door. In his mind, he thinks that NATO is a reactive, it's a proactive, organization. They're going to come and attack him.
NATO is a hostile military alliance, or could become one in the future.
Oh, there you go.
This situation, understandably, looks pretty grim.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not totally lost yet. In the years following the breakup of the Soviet Union, many of the newly independent republics established and joined their own military alliance called the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, which
Never
in
heard of
Europe
that.
consists of Russia, Belarus, and Armenia, but not Ukraine. which has remained a sort of neutral zone between NATO in the west and the CSTO in
And he
the
doesn't like
east.
that.
And now, within this lens, you can easily see why Ukraine is currently and always will be a geographic core interest to Moscow. If Ukraine is within Moscow's orbit, then it pushes the CSTO's and Moscow's defensive lines to the Carpathian Mountains in the southwest, and it narrows their exposure across the North European plain to only the eastern border of Poland. And while the Baltic states do lie across the plain as well, CSTO forces could easily encircle them by rapidly advancing across the narrow Suwalki gap between Kaliningrad and Belarus, and cut them off from the rest of NATO, meaning that they aren't as grave of a geographical threat.
Wow.
Conversely, however, if Ukraine became a NATO member state, it would surge the NATO front lines
that looks
far
much
beyond
different,
the
right, for
Carpathian
Russia.
Mountains and far across the wider section of the North European plain, and place the new defensible front line across nearly 2,300 kilometers of open, hard-to-defend, flat land, the easternmost section of which would only be a little more than 300 kilometers away from Volgograd, which, if taken, would shut down the entire Volga River and cut off Russia's valuable oil and gas resources coming up from around the Caspian Sea from the rest of the country.
Okay, obviously, Russia, I believe that predominantly, the Russian economy predominantly depends on the LGP. LGP? I know this. I know it in Spanish. Gas licuado de petróleo. But and then of course their oil.
As nearly happened during the Second World War, back when the city was better known as Stalingrad. Even further, Belarus, a friendly and loyal CSTO state that is often considered a mere extension of Moscow itself, would suddenly become an indefensible salient protruding deep into the NATO front lines, surrounded entirely by NATO territory on 3 flanks. Thus, Ukraine's outright control by Moscow, or at least neutrality, is essential to the defense of the CSTO and Russia, if you believe that NATO is a hostile aggressor or could become one in the future. But all of this is really only the beginning of what Russia and Putin want from Ukraine. The biggest thing they want of all is energy. While their overall economy is little larger than Spain's.
Okay, so now we saw the geopolitical reasons why they want Ukraine to be under the dominance of the Kremlin, right, of Moscow. Now they're going to explain the economic reasons, which to me, it's very, like, I did not know about the geopolitical ones, but it makes sense now. But the economic ones, as far as I know, Ukraine seem to have been or was or is rather poor country, but the more I've read in the last few weeks, Ukraine seems to be sitting on a lot of resources.
Russia remains a global superpower through the lens of energy resources, and it's specifically oil and gas that is the most critical component to understand about Russia's worldwide ambitions. Across multiple vast oil fields, Russia is the world's second largest producer of oil, ahead of even Saudi Arabia, while at the same time, Russia also possesses the world's largest proven reserves of natural gas, largely across Siberia, which has enabled Russia to become the world's leading exporter of natural gas. The revenues gained from the sale of all these oil and gas exports are the literal foundation for the modern Russian state and Russian power, because they provide as much as 50% of the entire Russian government's budget and represent about 30% of Russia's entire GDP. Russia has used the
all
vast
those oligarchs
money earned from selling oil and gas
made their
abroad
money
to fund their
in oil,
military,
right?
pay
Oil
off
and
debts,
gas.
Save cash, and finance its own restoration as a global great power. Russia is therefore effectively a petrostate, just like Saudi Arabia or Iran, and is the only petrostate located in Europe, at least for now. For you see, despite these massive geological blessings,
other country could
they
become
also
a
come with a
petrostate?
number of geographical catches from Moscow's perspective. Most of their gas is sold off to the hungry customers in the European Union. So much so that 35% of the EU's entire gas supply comes from Russia
35%.
alone, including
35%
Germany,
of the
world's
gas
fourth
consumed in the
largest
European
economy,
Union
who imports nearly
comes,
half
or
of their
used to
natural
come
gas
from
from
Russia.
This flow of gas towards Germany and Europe across this complex
Especially
system
Germany,
of
right? That's why they were so
provides
timid
critical
with the
revenues for the
sanctions
Russian government to
some
function
days ago,
and provides
right? Because
critical heat for European cities during the winter. And so both sides heavily rely upon the other here. Any disruption in this trade relationship would be disastrous from Moscow's perspective. And Ukraine is the most likely place for such a disruption to happen in the future. Back during the Soviet times, when Russia and Ukraine were both one country, pipelines were built across Ukraine almost like a bridge that transported gas directly from the Siberian sources to the customers in Europe. But then, all of a sudden, after the USSR's collapse, Ukraine was an independent country who's demanding tariffs to the tune of billions of dollars a year from Russia in order to continue using their country as a gas bridge to Europe.
Yeah, imagine, right? Like, when it was the USSR, that's it. Free flow, free passage, no problem. Now all of a sudden, Ukraine is an independent country. It's like, hey, if you want to, move your stuff through me, you're gonna have to pay a tariff. And I would imagine that that's billions of dollars.
Russia had no other choice but to agree, because the pipeline infrastructure anywhere else didn't yet exist. As late as 2005, 80% of Russia's gas exports heading to Europe were still flowing across pipelines through Ukraine.
Wow.
But in the decades
2005,
since, Russia
so
has sought to solve
Putin
this
was already
over-reliance
president.
on Ukraine by building multiple new pipelines that avoid Ukraine entirely, like Yamal Europe across loyal Belarus, Nord Stream 1 and 2 beneath the Baltic that go directly from Russia to Germany, Moscow's
Yeah, so
largest
the
single
Nord
customer, along
Stream
with South
2 is the
Stream,
one that
Blue
they
Stream, and
cancel
Turk
now.
Stream beneath the Black Sea. By 2024, Russia has plans to completely cease all of their gas exports through Ukraine entirely, and the government will save billions of dollars in tariffs as a result. But that is hardly what has been so threatening about Ukraine recently. Significantly more menacing to the perspective of Moscow was the discovery, for the first time in early 2012, that Ukraine's exclusive economic zone within the Black Sea may contain more than 2 trillion cubic meters worth of natural gas.
What?
Largely concentrated around the Crimean Peninsula. To make matters even more interesting,
Then, of
further
course,
technological advancements in the early 2010s
Holy shit. Now it makes sense. Now Crimea makes sense. It's all money, isn't it? It's all money.
that enabled the successful drilling of natural gas and oil from shale rock unlocked the potential shale gas hotspots for Ukraine around Donetsk and Kharkiv in the east and around the Carpathians in the west. Beginning in 2012, there was suddenly a very real possibility that almost out of nowhere, Ukraine had the world's 14th largest reserves of natural gas, just behind Australia and Iraq, which would have not only been a direct and serious competitor to Russia's own gas supply to the European Union, and thus at the same time a major threat to the Russian government's budget and GDP, but would have also provided the easy path of eventual Ukrainian admission into the European Union and NATO as well. And this is what's really, in my opinion, what this whole situation is truly about. In 2012, at the time when these discoveries were initially made, the man in charge of Ukraine was Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician who was keeping Ukraine more politically aligned with the interests of Moscow.
Yeah, I remember he was like a puppet president in 2014, where the protests in Kyiv started and everything, and it looked like practically a civil war. Then this guy fled to Russia. Wow, it's all for money, it's all for power, it's incredible. So you have a country who has the potential to be a superpower too, right? And the neighbors are like, no, fuck that shit. We're not gonna allow you to do that. They're bullies, they're huge bullies.
So long as he was president, these discoveries were not directly threatening to Russia. But when suddenly in February 2014, his government was toppled in a pro-EU and pro-Western revolution in Kiev, Moscow was very quick to take the opportunity to invade some of Ukraine, seize the Crimean Peninsula, and annex it in the name of historical claims and protecting ethnic Russians. But by seizing Crimea, the Russians also took direct control of 2/3 of Ukraine's coastline and, by extension, the vast majority of Ukraine's maritime exclusive economic
It's like, what is this? Is it the Middle Ages? Did you just go and you claim that this land is going to be yours and you just kill everyone there and now that's your land?
In addition, billions of dollars worth of drilling equipment and other assets in the peninsula were seized by the Russians, all of which completely crippled the Ukrainian government's future potential to challenge Russia's gas supremacy in Europe. To make matters even worse, from Ukraine's perspective, the areas of Ukraine that are the most rich in shale gas are located very near to the most major conflict zones encouraged and funded from Moscow, with the Donetsk and Luhansk rebellions here and the Transnistria breakaway republic in Moldova over here, which, in my view,
this Transnistria, it's like in Moldova, but I saw a video of a YouTuber who went there and it was mostly all Russian speaking and basically Russia in Moldova.
Resources themselves, and no capability to challenge Russia's occupation of Crimea. From the perspective of Putin and his regime, these were all mandatory actions to take in order to curb a Western-oriented Ukraine from ever selling major supplies of gas to Europe that would threaten his own regime's primary source of wealth and power. Ukraine had to be dismembered to protect himself and the other oligarchs who are in power. But there's more. Under Putin, Russia can't ever give Crimea back to Ukraine because it would surrender the entire exclusive economic zone and all of the gas resources within it back, along with the strategic port city of Sevastopol, one of the very few year-round ice-free ports that the Russian Navy can use and needs to operate throughout the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. If Crimea was ever returned to Ukraine and Ukraine joined NATO, they would regain their ability to threaten the Russian government's primary source of revenue, and the Russian Navy's most geostrategically valuable port would be lost forever. But Ukraine has some pressure that it can and has been applying itself.
So guys, I stopped it there. The video continues with a fantastic explanation of what Putin did in Georgia, which gives you a great precedent of what he's doing now. It's almost like a textbook. It's like a manual of what he did then, what he's doing now is the same thing. I really highly recommend you go and finish this video. I just don't want to make my episode as long. But yeah, I understand now. I understand 100% what is happening, and it's what it's always has happened in history. It's about power, control. It's about money, and I think it has little to do with nationalism. I don't think that Putin is such a nationalist, and he's so pro-Russia. I think he just wants to be the leader of a very, 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 very big empire, and if he brings back the USSR, it's going to be as big as an empire as it can be, right? Especially if you take into consideration that we're living in the 21st century, and we have other very big players like China on the other side of the world. So it's basically neutralizing the West, neutralizing the United States. So yeah, but it's pretty sad that all of this is done because of the desire of one person or a handful of people that have completely disregard for human rights, and it's yeah, I don't know. I think that I'm gonna end this episode right here, and yeah, let me go to my outro. And that's all, guys. That's the end of the episode. I hope that you guys found it interesting, insightful. To me, this video was very insightful. It gives me a very good idea of what is going on now. I hope that by the time you get to see this video, I am recording on a Friday, 4th of March, and you guys are gonna get to see this video. I believe that it's gonna be like on the Tuesday 8. So we still have 4 more days, and when you're in the middle of a war, even 24 hours can be pretty significant. So I'm just gonna, do this as we do in DR, or do this as we do in Poland. That nothing significant has happened by the time you're watching this video, but you never know. Anyways, see you guys soon, and write whatever you want to write in the comments. Just be respectful, and That's it. Bye.